Right now we're going to have Keith Hibbert come up and speak. Keith is actually the guy who got this thing kicked off. Give Keith a big welcome.
I promised someone I wasn't going to be speaking off notes, but I want to make sure I get my facts straight. I'm speaking about the history of the original Boston Tea Party. So I'm going to start off with that. After the French and Indian War, the Parliament of Great Britain passed the Townshend Act in order to repay the debts that they had incurred from that war. Now, the colonies refused to pay the levies required by the Townshend Acts because they claimed they had no obligation to pay taxes imposed by Parliament in which they had no representation. So in response, Parliament did retract most of the taxes except for the duty on tea. They left that in there as a demonstration of their right to tax people without representation. They also had another problem to fix at the same time. The East India Company was struggling and was going bankrupt. So they decided they could fix, two problems at the same time. So they decided to give the East India Company a monopoly on all of the importation of tea to the colonies.
Sounds like a bailout.
Yeah. Sounds a little bit like history repeating itself. Now, they did reduce the duty on the tea. Actually, one of the things about the tax they were paying was actually, after the duty, and even with the East India Company, people were going to be paying less for tea than they ever were before. They figured, coupled with that, and foregoing the tea pleasure of a cup of tea, that people would just, go ahead and go with it, and they'd go ahead and pay the duty and everything else, and acknowledge Parliament's right to tax them without representation. Now, there are some people who are saying today, have said in the past, well, this is just about taxes, this is just about spending, this isn't about principle. It is about principle in a way. No one's denied us our right to vote. That is true. However, for example, we're talking about the stimulus bill, one of the things we were talking about. Now, the final version of that bill was not released until midnight of the day that it was passed. In between the time that it was voted for in Congress, or came up for a vote in Congress, and the time that it was released, you would have had, it was about 1,100 pages. You would have had to read at about a rate of 626 pages per hour to actually finish the thing by the time you had to vote on it.
Nobody read it.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think anybody here thinks we elected a Congress full of speed readers, especially speed readers and legalese.
No.
So, exactly. So, the East India Company, back to the original history, they sent shipments of tea to Philadelphia and New York. Those ships were not allowed to land. In Charleston, the tea-laden ships were permitted to dock, where their cargo was consigned to a warehouse where it would remain for 3 years until it was sold by patriots in order to help finance the revolution. However, in Boston, the arrival of 3 tea ships ignited a furious reaction. The crisis came to a head on December 16, 1773, when as many as 7,000 agitated locals milled about the wharf where the ships were docked. A mass meeting that morning resolved that the tea ships should leave the harbor without payment of any duty. A committee was selected to take this message to the Customs House to force release of the ships out of the harbor. The Collector of Customs refused to allow the ships to leave without payment of the duty. So a howl erupted from the meeting hall when they heard this message. Then in the evening, a group of about 200 men, thinly disguised as Indians, assembled on a nearby hill. Whooping war chants, the crowd marched 2 by 2 to the wharf, descended upon the 3 ships, and dumped the offending cargo of 90,000 pounds of tea into the harbor. Now, whatever your position about the AIG bonuses was, whether that was greed or that's what's required to do business, the clause that authorized those was in the stimulus bill. The people in Congress, they voted for that. If they had read the bill, they would have known that it was in there, but instead, no, they had phony outrage, and they had to have a 90% retroactive tax to fix the mistake that they made in the first place. And of course, one of the things I don't think anybody here thinks that lawyers are underrepresented on Capitol Hill. Wouldn't these be the last people you would expect to not read the fine print? Oh, everything's fine, just sign here. So the truth is, these protests, they aren't about principle. When you are electing representatives who aren't bothering to read the bill, they're just going there to be a rubber stamp for their party's agenda. That's not representation. So this is taxation without representation. And another point, and somebody else, I forget his name, he made it earlier. I think it was about 13. Some of the people who are being taxed with all of this, they're not even old enough to vote. So how's that for taxation without representation? Some of the people who are going to pick up the bill on this have yet to be born. And of course, I want to just throw this out there. A lot of people complain about the income tax. The government's taking so much out of my check, they take this much out of my check, But a lot of times we don't talk about how much comes out after we even get our check. We've got let's see, sales tax, property tax, sin tax, excise tax, fuel tax, wheel tax, import tax. I think I saw somebody with a sign that said inheritance tax. I know I've left plenty out, but I mean, when you add all those up with your income tax, that's going to be what, 30, 40, maybe 50% for some people that you're paying out of all the money that you make. Probably about 50% is going to government. Not to mention the layers of it. You've got city, you've got county, you've got state, you've got federal. That's about where I wanted to end it, but I do want to thank everyone for coming today. You know, I started this like, you know, they said about, the day I actually officially set up just the Facebook page is a month ago to the day, 2 days. Did not even imagine there would be this many people here. But I want to thank everyone. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for being here, and like Rick said, we're planning on having more in the future. Our ultimate goal, and it's not partisan, it's not depending on which party. We want to influence elections to help support people who are fiscal conservatives, regardless of party, so that they can represent us in the Congress and the executive branch in our state, locally. And so, I mean, that's why we're going for donations, why we're having people sign up and everything, so we can get the information out there for a future Tea Party. One of the things I said to some of them was that no matter how many people came today, no matter how many people knew about this party today, there's going to be people who see it on the news. There's going to be people who read about it in the newspaper afterwards, and they're going to look at it and say, oh, I didn't know that was going on. I wish I'd been there. So we're not stopping with just this one. So, all right, well, thank you.